Morning, everybody. This is narrative occupational storytelling and occupational story making. Here are objectives. These are essentially from the Module 8 instructions that we received from Christy. So we'll identify the essential elements of a narrative. We'll talk about how we use narrative to understand occupation, how we might use it as a research method, discuss definitions, and how we would apply all of this to practice. The references are from our readings, and then I've added some information from Hasselkuss Chapter 1. So what are the traits of a narrative? Well, narratives help us to find and create meaning. Meaning would be the individual's interpretation of the occupational form, and then within that, we would find meaningfulness, and that's what motivates our occupational performance. The other function of narrative is to create structure, and the narrative also imparts some sense of power. It can enhance what we're doing, it can reveal things about ourselves or our clients, and it really creates a sense of connection, and we'll illustrate that here in a minute or two. So what are the haves and have-nots of narratives? Narratives are most definitely event-centered. There's something has happened that's worthy of a story. They've happened in a particular time, in a particular place. They're action-oriented. So there's plots. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. And sometimes there's conflict with resolution. Sometimes there's conflict without resolution, and that's part of the ongoing narrative is what can we do to address that. What narratives are not are just general descriptions or informative statements. So when we're eliciting an occupational history, we are probably not in the narrative form. However, our readings tell us that we could easily shift our clients into narrative form by learning what kinds of questions to ask and understanding when to ask them. There are all different types of narratives. Not all of them were discussed in our reading. The ones that were addressed by Mattingly and Lawler in their 2000 article included the illness narrative from the perspective of the family. What is their experience of care and concern for their loved ones? Then there are what they refer to as treatment stories, which would be our perspective as well as the family's perspective. If we look at the story that Mattingly and Lawler gave us about Barbara, the mom with the ill child who took so long to get diagnosed with the brain tumor, there are other narratives within that that they don't really pull out in that brief article. And one would be a social narrative. So we learn in the story that Barbara's going to a hospital that is not the one that she typically goes to, and we're sort of left with the sense that, you know, there's maybe more of a sense of privilege at this newer hospital that she goes to. And so there's a narrative of social economic status between caring environments. And then we have the physician's narrative. What experiences is the physician bringing to her care, her interface with Barbara and Rhonda? And then we have factors of race and gender. You know, are there experiences that either of the actors in the story bring to it that are influenced by those facts? Then we could look at the institutional narrative. What is that particular hospital as an institution saying to their employees and to their other constituents about who they prefer to serve, what their mission is, so on and so forth. And then within that, we have the organizational narrative. You know, organizational narratives can change according to economic times, shifts in mission statements, those sorts of things. So these would be part of the physician's experience and maybe part of the narrative of people who greet Barbara as she enters the hospital at the door. So all of these narratives are interfacing to create the ultimate narrative that Barbara shares with us. There are certainly narratives of disability. We've looked at that quite a bit over the course of our program so far. There are narratives of sexuality. We have addressed those in all of our classes as well. And then Mattingly and Lawler in 2001 in their later article also discuss healing narratives. So within all of these narratives, particularly within institutions and organizations, we can think about how occupational justice is or is not present as a result of the narratives that we bring to the story. So using narratives to understand occupation. Mattingly and Lawler tell us that stories are powerful, and we've all had that experience. I have in the pictures here represented books that I've read, and I've had different reactions to. I love Pride and Prejudice. I don't know why. I love the story. I love the romance of it. I love the time period. I love the purity of the relationship between the primary characters. I think it's a beautiful story. And I'm on this kick to read novels, novels that have received Pulitzer Prize awards. One of which is The Great Gatsby, which I read last summer. Hated the book. Currently reading The Mambo Kings Sing Songs of Love. Not crazy about that one either. So there's something about Pulitzer Prize winning novels and me that is a little bit of a disconnect. I'm trying to learn about that for myself. So The Great Gatsby, I didn't connect with it. The characters were okay. My investment in reading it wasn't about the story. It was about an external goal that I had set for myself. I couldn't really relate to it. There's something about that story that I just didn't get. A Girl of the Limberlost I found enchanting. I read it a few years ago. The descriptions are rich. You feel like you're in that environment. You understand the occupational dreams of the central character. You're hoping that she'll be able to pull them off. There's a little bit of danger in there. Just a beautifully written book, in my opinion. And then there's The Lovely Bones, which I don't know how many of you have read it. I don't see how that's a story that you can really love. But you can't help but connect with the story and relate to it. And the feeling that you walk away with, though, is completely different than other stories that you might read. That's not to say that there still isn't power and value in the narrative. It just depicts the range of narrative that we'll experience, whether it's in our leisure pursuits or in our professional pursuits, and just sort of identifying with the idea that we need to embrace all of those narratives and really understand them in order to be engaged in best practice. We're also looking in this module at narrative as a research method, and that's abundantly clear in your readings. The highlighted, italicized pink words is my way of highlighting words that really spoke to me when trying to get this point across for this mini lecture. So Mattingly and Lawler in 2000 talk about the potent role that narrative can play in illuminating. I love that word, illuminating, and I'll talk about this picture in a minute related to that, the world of the client. And then they also tell us that many phenomenologically oriented medical ethnographers believe currently that narratives are the best way to discover a person's lived experience. I didn't say, to find important facts about it or to understand it even. They said discover, which is a whole other level of feeling and experience. And so this is where the client has a narrative, the therapist has a narrative, and the family has a narrative. And again, I see those as a transactional relationship. And then they also tell us such story illuminates meaning. There's that word illuminates again. And this picture that I found, to me, looks like a phosphorescent picture of DNA. So I thought, oh, that's perfect. It sort of illuminates the very essence of who we are. And then I researched the picture a little bit. This is actually jewelry. It's silver and silicone that's phosphorescent. And so when you're not in a dark room, it just looks like jewelry. But when you're in the dark, it glows like this. I'm fascinated by it. It's made by Jenny Llewellyn in England. I've written her a note already, try to see if I can even afford to own a piece of it. It's just the jewelry, it just tells a story. It draws me in. If I had a client wearing something like that, it would probably start our narrative. So narratives have something that draws in. They have a way for us to relate, a way for us to connect. And sometimes objects like jewelry can be a tool that helps us begin to establish that connectedness and start to form our narrative. Like any good graduate program, there's new terms that we need to understand. And these aren't hard for us as practicing occupational therapists to get. We do it, now we're formalizing it. And we have occupational science to thank for a lot of this enriching of what we do and enriching of the understanding of who we are. So occupational storytelling, a means by which therapists better understand the spirit of the survivors with whom they work. This is Florence Clark in her 1993 Eleanor Clark Slagle lecture. And she's talking about her particular experience with her colleague and soon-to-become friend who suffered a brain aneurysm and resulting in a stroke. And Florence befriended her, and they went on this journey together. And so she's saying that their story was explicitly constructed around the theme of occupation. And we can generalize that to say, when we're in occupational storytelling, that the stories are explicitly constructed around the theme of occupation, which is what we do as occupational therapists. Now we'll be more intentional about it, and we'll do a better job. In occupational story making, this is actually a therapeutic tool. It involves the therapist and the person, and Florence refers to this person as a survivor, creating stories that are enacted in the future. So we're not telling a story because the story hasn't happened yet. We're creating the story. And Florence talks about problematiques, and which would sort of be like your problem list and your treatment plan. But these are things that present to the person as something that is threatening, endangering. We might call it a barrier in some contexts, things that are stopping them from moving forward. And so we create story around that, and then the person is empowered to enact the story.